We have some of the finest machinists that work for our company. I like to say that I don't make a product, I employ some of the best machinists that you can find. So we have artists, true machinist artists that work for us. And without their help and without their support and without their knowledge, we would be not in existence.
Hey, it's Ari Santiago, President, CEO of IT Direct. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Made in America podcast. Just a brief note at the beginning, if you haven't yet, please do subscribe and leave us a rating. Our goal is to build this community. We're really excited to have you and want you to not miss any of the episodes. Speaking of which, today, I'm with Marcy Minnick, CEO of Excello Tool Engineering and Manufacturing. Very excited to have Marcy on, hear all about her background story and what's going on with her business here in Connecticut. Marcy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me today, Ari.
Well, listen, Marcy, it's the Made in America podcast. So we're going to start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
So we are a custom CNC job shop. We don't actually have a product line. We just manufacture milling and turning equipment for a variety of different industries throughout the state, throughout the nation, and throughout the world. The majority of our stuff tends to be in a bucket list of several different components. We do some commercial, we do some defense, we do some aerospace, we do some medical. We've been able to diversify our product line for quite some time.
Well, that's really awesome. So before we get into a little bit more of the what, why don't we get a little bit of the why? Why does Excello Tool exist?
So we have always been a support manufacturer for most of the industries throughout the state. We've existed because we have some of the finest machinists that work for our company. I like to say that I don't make a product, I employ some of the best machinists that you can find. So we have artists, true machinist artists that work for us. And without their help and without their support and without their knowledge, we would be not in existence.
That's awesome. Listen, I mean, people and the quality of the people is such a tremendous asset for any business to have. And it's just tremendous to have a great company like that here in Connecticut.
It sure is.
So let's talk a little bit about the background. I mean, Excello Tool is not a recent business, been around since 1960. Can you maybe give us a little bit of the background, how the company got started?
Sure. So my grandfather opened the company in 1960. He is a World War II vet. He started off learning how to machine when he was working for the Army over in Italy, where he was actually machining parts to fix airplanes. And then when he came back to the States, he was working as a machinist for a variety of different companies. And most predominantly, he was doing repairs for companies like Winchester and Remington Arms, where at that point, he decided to open up his own little machine shop. And began continuing to do repair work for their machines. As it evolved, my father went to Wentworth Institute of Technology up in Boston, and he learned CNC machining. And back in the early 70s, he brought that new industry back to our company. And that's when we started to get into more rapid machining, larger orders, larger components. And he got a big contract with IBM, where he started making the reel spools for them. And it just kind of networked into a variety of different things, different industries. So back in 2000, I started to get involved in the business. I was going to school getting my master's, and I had done a research dissertation on ISO 9000 certification. And I kind of walked into my dad's office one day and I said, hey, this is before I had gotten into the industry and before I had any imagination of getting involved in manufacturing, and said, hey, you really need to do this if you wanted to get into the next generation. And I was working for New Haven Register. I was doing advertising for them. I thought I was going to get into more marketing and advertising. And he kind of turned to me and said, well, go ahead. I said, well, I didn't really know how to implement it. I just knew that it was a concept, and had a conversation with him, had a conversation with the general manager, and we all sort of agreed that it was the next step for the business. And at that point, that's when I stepped over and took a job working for him. At that point, I was just kind of doing secretarial stuff, right, on the phone and researching and trying to figure out how to get this new model in, learning about the business. And 5 years later, we went full guns and went ISO 9000 2001 with the help of Concept,
nice,
which was a great resource that we used at the time. And now we're, moving into the next generation. I have been CEO of the company now for about 4 years. My father is semi-retired. He still comes around and supports, but at this point, he sort of left it in the bucket of myself and my general manager. I brought my sister on board. She's working as my CFO. And we're moving towards, the next generation of manufacturing.
That's really awesome. So when you were growing up, did you work in the shop at all? Did you have exposure?
The exposure that I had was really sort of pushing paper in the office. My dad, I'm one of 4 children. I have 2 brothers and a sister. And, we all had an experience. We all, throughout high school, were working our summer jobs there or Christmas break. I did a little bit of packing and a little bit of delivering, but I never had much experience working out on the floor. So I certainly knew that was going to be a challenge for me, having not really had any sort of manufacturing experience. And fortunately enough, there was a new innovation of tech schools that were offering programs and training. So as I started to transition in the CEO role, there was certainly a gap on how I was going to be able to communicate with my staff, the staff that I have is been there for a long time. I mean, my general manager has been almost 45 years with the company, as well as my foreman. So certainly they were, as inclusive as they could be and as supportive as they could be, but they were uncertain about, this young woman coming in that really had a big fat business degree and no experience in actual hands-on manufacturing. And it's a small business. So I panicked. And I, tried to find out, as my training had said, you've got to educate yourself. You got to educate yourself. Got to educate yourself. So I had learned about the program that was happening at Housatonic Community College at the time, and they had just started their 9-month manufacturing technology education program, and it's a 40-hour, 5-day-a-week program that I certainly knew that I wasn't going to be able to commit to. How was I going to be able to, get this information but not have to commit to an entire program? So I went down to Housatonic and I was able to sit down and have a really wonderful face-to-face conversation with Rich Dupont, who at the time was running the program, and said, I need some help. I'm getting into 3rd generation. I'm getting into a manufacturing business that I'm really passionate about, and I'm really sure that I want it to survive into the next generation and I want it to grow, but I need this knowledge of basic manufacturing. How do I measure? How do I cut? How do I identify tools? How do I identify different materials? And he, with open arms, offered to allow me to just adjunct or just kind of watch the program, come and participate, but not without grading.
Like an audit?
Audit, yep, that's the right word. Audit the program, and I with full arms took that opportunity. So I did that. I audited the program. Mostly, I stayed most of the academic stuff. I stayed in the classroom at Housatonic, and then came back to my shop and did all the lab work. We have a small tool room down in the basement that has all these beautiful old Bridgeports that my grandfather had started the company with, and lathes. And at that time, my dad was still around and sort of trying to find something to do. So him and I would go down, 3 days a week in the basement, and he would teach me full-on basic machining off Bridgeports and lathes and cutting tools. So it was this amazing experience I have had in my career, certainly that bonding experience with my dad, to be down there and learning, from the master himself. And then also, I think my employees certainly found this great connection with me to think, she's in this, and we're going to make this work. So, now here we are.
That's awesome. Listen, I think it shows so much when you really what do they say? Put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly.
Getting in there, committing the time. You've got a family, right? So there's that time as well. That's pretty amazing. Let me go take one step back for a second. So you guys are now 3rd generation, which is just tremendous. You and I spoke kind of before the show about how hard it is to get from 1 to 2, and it's twice as hard or more to get from 2 to 3. Do you know about the transition from your grandfather to your father and sort of how that played out and how that went smoothly and successfully, which clearly it did ultimately?
So, I was fortunate enough to be around at the time. My grandfather was still alive, and I wouldn't necessarily say active in the business, but the transition of ownership was happening at the time when I first started with the company. And, they did a really great job hiring the right crew of succession planning attorneys and accountants that helped with that process.
That's awesome. Listen, that's awesome to hear, and I think that's an important lesson people can learn if they want to transition. Bring in the experts to do it.
Yeah.
So, have you guys been doing that same approach when it comes to you and your dad and that transition?
We are. We have just started the process. Business valuations. Having a conversation about stock values and how they work and how they're going to move. So we're in the midst of it right now.
Did you guys have a conversation about doing an intergenerational transition versus selling the business altogether? And was there any consideration of that and why one way or the other?
Selling the business at this point is not something that we've ever put on the table. We're very committed to it, and we see this as a family business, not just as my immediate family, but also for the families that have been employed with us for years and years and years. And we like the culture. So it's not an option at this point.
So did you sort of discover a passion for manufacturing through working there? Because it sounds like when you went to your career, this wasn't on your radar as a career. I mean, you were at a newspaper, you had mentioned doing marketing, and then now here you are, CEO and soon to be owner of this great legacy, Connecticut manufacturing business. I mean, why didn't you consider it? Because clearly you've developed a passion for it. Talk about that.
I think, and I will say this quite often as I'm standing in front of, a room full of students or people that are considering, making career choices. I think manufacturing is, as I mentioned before, an art. And it's something that is innately in your bones that you've just been exposed to, and it comes very naturally to you. I think, like any youth, you kind of want to go against what the natural grain of your body is telling you to do, because it's just you want to experience things outside of your comfort zone. It was certainly easy for me to come back, and it seemed kind of like child's play to be back in my own shop, which I'd grown up through my whole life. And understanding and learning the trade wasn't difficult for me to learn either. It was very easy to understand measuring. It was very easy to understand the processes and different metals and components. So whether it was because I had been exposed to it my whole life or innately it's just something that's in my talent field, I'm not really sure, but I'm grateful for it.
So when you came back to your dad and you were like, hey, Dad, time for you to go ISO 9000, and he's like, sounds great, Marcy, when are you starting? Were you resistant at first? Like, tell me about kind of what was going through your head. I know it was a while ago, but.
Yeah. I think I found it to be exciting. I've always been an idea pusher. I've always been the type of person to learn a bunch of information about a concept, and it was a great opportunity for me to implement that concept in a safe environment, right? This was something that we were going to have the support at home. I was going to have the support in my career, and we were going to be able to always kind of talk through it. So it was not difficult for me to leave my corporate job and come and work for my dad. No.
And when you started, were you right away, you'd referenced before, but right away you kind of walked in, were you that feeling of like, oh, I think I might be home?
No. No, right away when I walked in, I was walking into a well-oiled machine that had been doing things the way they've been doing things for 40 plus years.
Right.
So I think that these people had known me since I was born. Literally, the general manager started working 6 months after my mother had me.
Oh, wow.
So he has known me for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I think that he certainly, and as well as the rest of the staff kind of had to nurture me into finding that position on whether or not I was just a family member who was going to try to swallow this thing or somebody who was really going to be committed to it. So
how did you, it's an interesting dynamic, right? So here's somebody who, to your just own description, had known you since you were born, may have seen you in diapers, certainly growing up and all that stuff. How did you...
In high school.
In high school, yeah, probably even more embarrassingly, right? How did you garner their respect? I know that's hard in any environment, but I know in manufacturing, there's a reputation of just being even more kind of like hard scrabble into their own stuff. How did you win their respect?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that is very unique about my business and our company is that our culture is very family-oriented. And I think it was important for them to realize that I was in no way, shape, or form had any intention on changing that culture. I would constantly and continuously always try to make sure that they realize that no matter what, family comes first, right? So I needed to make sure I garnered that concept as in whatever conversation, I'm always in tune, or try to always be in tune on what's happening in their personal life and how important it is to take care of that. I certainly didn't want to exhaust any of my employees, because we are so lean. As one of the other challenges that we have going into the next generation is being able to find qualified help to replace the help that's going out. So, some of my guys are working 65, 70 hours a week, and I have to be certain to make sure that their health and their family life is a priority to me. And I think that that's where they connect with me. Certainly, I'm a working mom, and I have to make sure that I find that balance in my own life. And I think the men that work for me and women that work for me often can struggle with that, because the work is always piling up, right? We're in an industry where it never seems to get done. There never seems to be a break. So I implemented some really great policies that I think have really helped move us into the next generation. We have a much more flexible PTO schedule, our plan. We have much more, we've continued to keep really, really good benefits, medical and health, dental benefits, while companies are starting to change and limit those. I'm continuously trying to keep my loyalty and keep my relationship with my employees by making sure that those are the most important things as we're running the business.
Do you think that, certainly everyone can have different experience and dads, men are dads too, but do you think that your perspective as a working mom has really helped you to foster kind of more of a family culture?
I would agree so. My family, I'm one of four. My family always had very strong family values. It was always very important that we put our families first. And most of the people that work for me also have those same values. I think they, want to be at their kids' baseball games at 5 o'clock, and they want to be able to run out at 12 to go to a school play. And in a flexible work environment, as things are starting to move, we have to be accommodating to that. And I, as a working mom, also wanted to have those benefits. Kids are volatile, and especially in a time like now where we're in COVID, where kids are even more volatile and their schedules are even crazier, and we need to be more flexible as working parents. We've kind of kept that as still keeping that as a priority within our company. And it seems to be working.
I bet it is. How do you listen, it's awesome to have that flexibility, but we also need to meet customer demand, right? So how do you strike that balance to keep people focused on the business results that we need, while also having this important family flexibility that we need too?
So we have done some flexible work hours, right? We've had, some guys that will come in, or, ourselves come in very, very early in the morning. We only work one shift, but if we need to, we try to work things around. We had many families that, unfortunately, we're not in an environment where we could have done any working from home. We are completely hands-on manufacturing. But I didn't have anybody who didn't have a companion that was able to do it. So if there were children involved, there were wives or there were husbands that were able to stay home and help during the time when kids were not in school. I myself had to make flexible work schedules, and that was certainly a massive challenge for me. I wasn't coming in until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was working till 10 o'clock at night, or I was coming in on Saturdays and Sundays. But like anything, we muscle through it. In terms of customer demand, we had a massive increase in customer demand over COVID. We had a customer who retrofitted their machines that were used for another industry that changed, and they were manufacturing PPE equipment. So what was usually an order of, hypothetically, say 10 units a month, shot up to a unit of 100 units a month.
Oh, wow.
And the demand was massively huge. So we, buckled down, and we increased everybody's hours, and we alternated shifts, and we implemented our social distancing policies as best as we could, and we were able to meet those demands. By the grace of God, I guess you could say. I'm not really sure.
But
tremendous. Just some really, industry long educated knowledge my staff was able to get those to me.
Listen, it's a Yankee ingenuity at work, that small business mentality, getting it done. So let's pull a little bit on the COVID thread a little bit. Do you feel that the culture, let me start with this. How would you describe the culture at Excello? We started talking about this a little bit, but maybe go a little bit more in depth. How would you describe it?
So I was fortunate enough that I personally live in an area that was first struck in the state. So our town, I grew up I live in Darien, so we're right in between Stamford and Norwalk, which were hit much harder and much earlier. So I had gotten a lot of information and a lot of resources from our first selectman in Darien, who she was really keeping us abreast on protocol. And I was able to really quickly bring that to Excello before Milford even had their first case and surrounding areas. And certainly people were like, this was kind of like, you guys are panicked. As anyone is, nobody really believed that it was going to be the pandemic that it turned out to be. But they, hook, line, and sinker, went for it. We are fortunately enough have a large manufacturing facility, and our machines are pretty separated and far apart. So we didn't have to really worry about how are we going to be able to create this process by actually social distancing my machinists. But I certainly was concerned with, bringing it in, or spouses that were out in industry, or is somebody going out, and not social distancing outside of the workplace. But I also, did a lot of help with kind of getting the anxiety out of what happens if we do have somebody who thinks they might get sick, is sick, or has a family member that's sick. And I, right away, before any of the family medical leave stuff was passed, put in a extension to our PTO policy, where if anybody had thought that they had gotten COVID or exposed to COVID or had a family member that was COVID, I right off the bat gave them the opportunity to take some PTO time that was a gift from the company versus having to use their own PTO time. Because I certainly didn't want anybody panicking that, oh my God, I'm not going to get paid, right? So I just, I gave everybody an extra 40 hours if COVID did hit them or their family.
And did you guys end up needing to use that?
I have not. No, we've been very fortunate enough that we haven't had anybody who has been hit by it. So.
Well, when your demand is up the way it has been, you're very lucky because you want to keep all those people. And so when in terms of your day-to-day role with the organization, are you involved in business development, mostly just strategy in the business? What are you doing kind of day-to-day?
So mostly strategy in the business, and then some business development. I tend to try to keep myself not in the office that much and more out, making a name for my company and marketing and talking to people who can possibly use our service. Mm-hmm. We are a job shop. So more than not, there's many manufacturers who do need us at some point for support, whether it's for a long-term relationship or short-term relationships. We do, we're equipped to do long runs and short runs. So I try to keep myself out there to be a sounding board or to be a resource for many of the industries that are in the state.
So we ran into each other at Manufacturer CT. We used to be called the NHMA.
Right.
How long have you guys been involved in Manufacturer CT?
So I've been a member of Manufacturer CT for 4 years. I went on the board 2 years ago, and now I'm the vice president of it. So it's been an amazing organization that I've gotten involved in. It certainly has educated me and put me in touch with so many great resources and great people that are like-minded, that are all kind of having the same issues or same ideas. And I would encourage anybody who's in this manufacturing industry to jump on board, because it's really a great resource.
Having been in the business for so long, and Excello being in business for so long in Connecticut, why so long before you guys kind of got involved in one of the manufacturing groups? I
didn't know about it. My accountant actually, showed up, and he was a member of it and just said, you really need to get involved in this. You really need to get involved in this. I mean, over the last 4 years, it has grown tremendously, right? And we've had a brand change, and we're strategizing to go statewide. So it's changing. But I also think that, it's diversified. Mm-hmm. I think if you probably walked in 8 years ago to manufacturing, NHMA, there probably would have been a whole different demographic of people there that you would find now. Mm-hmm. There's so many organizations that are, suited for who I was in the industry. I was young. I came into manufacturing at 30 years old, 28 years old, whatever it may be. And I'm a woman.
Right.
So I kind of was not the norm. And now I'm finding that I am. I've met a tremendous amount of really powerful, strong manufacturing women throughout that organization. Some young, the next generation. So I think as it changes and as it morphs into the next generation, you're going to find it to be even a greater resource.
So talk about your experience as a woman in manufacturing just a little bit. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there is still this perception out there that women may not be as welcome or as valued in manufacturing. Yeah. It's the old boys network. I mean, have you found that? What are you seeing in your personal experience?
So I have not found that. I mean, I certainly, prior to, my grandfather was in the business, my father was in the business. It was the old, it was the white guy industry.
Right.
And with welcome arms, when I came in, people were supportive of my gender and my age, incredibly. Now, and even now, I'm very active in the technology schools. And if you walk into a classroom now and you see the demographics of kids that are now taking these classes, there are, I'm going to say 40% women in the class, which is so wonderful to see.
Yes.
And I think it's our role as owners and CEOs and HR representatives to make sure that we are encouraging those women to apply for these positions and to get into these careers, because it really is quite a fantastic career, and regardless of what level of manufacturing you get into.
Do you find that the group Manufacturer CT and other groups in Connecticut have been helpful in helping, number one, to educate you on what manufacturing is and see different aspects, as well as helping you network with other women and other people in manufacturing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's, a slew of organizations out there. The other one we belong to is Women in Manufacturing, WIM, which I went to a conference that they had done in Boston 2 years ago, which, absolutely blew my socks off. It was really phenomenal to see. It was a room full of really bright, really powerful, really innovative women who are all engaged and supported by this manufacturing community. So I would like to take every single young woman or transitional woman who wants to get into this industry to these events and just show them, this is, you can be STEM, you can be coding, you can be anything you want. You can get your hands dirty. It is out there, and we are just as powerful and strong and innovative as anybody else in our industry. So
that's really terrific. What do you say to people, business leaders, men and women, whatever, who are like, listen, Manufacturer CT or ACM or EMA or whatever, that all sounds great, but I got to get my business running. I'm dealing with COVID. I've got to find new customers. We're trying to implement lean. We're trying to do ISO, whatever. I don't have the time. What would you say to somebody who doesn't think they have the time?
So fortunately enough, this next generation that we've been pulling through is really trying to focus on that, right? We are all way overworked in our industry, and being able to find time to network and being able to find time to socialize within our industry is the last on our list of things to do. But we've started to really kind of take a poll and find out what times best work. How can we have flexible events? We've done a lot more evening events, which, happen between 4 and 6 p.m., after work, social hours. And I think even now, with things going so digital and there's so many Zoom programs that are so educational, it's a really great opportunity to sit, in your office without having to jump in the car and drive up to Hartford or drive to New Haven or drive to Brantford, and be able to participate in some of these great programs, all via Zoom, right from your office, eating your own sandwich at your desk. Which, these are some of the benefits that came out of COVID, is that our time management seems to, it's a little bit more workable, because that driving time and is lessened. So right now is a perfect opportunity to test these organizations out, as they are doing so many e-programs to kind of get a feel for it.
What do you, when you think about the investment, and the membership isn't super expensive, it's really the time, right, that we cost. So when you think about ROI, right, business leader, I know you're thinking about return on investment. How do you think about the return on the investment of your time back to what you get in, what get out, what you put in terms of going to Manufacturer CT and going to those events? Well,
you get one new customer and it's completely paid for itself. That's one portion of things.
Sure.
The other portion of things, the learning experience that you get and the resources that you get from finding people who are so invested in your industry, and have so much experience. I mean, whether it's, manufacturing accountants or manufacturing attorneys or, estate planning people or just people that have, different processes that they can share with you. Just, one good experience that sort of helps your bottom line with how small the investment is to get involved in these organizations. It's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, one of the goals of this podcast and this thesis is that if we can all learn and share and grow with each other, we'll all be better off. In Connecticut, we're not manufacturers competing against each other. We're a manufacturing team competing against the world.
Absolutely.
And we need to think together and work together. And these organizations, in my view, are a tremendous opportunity for us to learn and grow. And it's great. I think you hit on something which we don't talk about a lot, but there's a social aspect. When you're in manufacturing, it's different than other businesses. And having other people who you can kind of relate to and discuss lean or whatever it is, it's really, I think, super helpful. It sounds like you found the same thing.
Exactly.
So let's talk about change a little bit. You came into an organization that's set in its ways, and a lot of Connecticut manufacturers, especially the family-owned ones, and there's many, many of them, they've been doing the same thing the same way for many decades. Mm-hmm. How did you get the organization to change? How did you bring them on? Because I think a lot of people feel like, well, if I go to change, then I have to get rid of everybody that's been around for 20 years. But you've been able to make a change, and you've kept your foreman, kept your general manager, who've been there for decades and decades. How'd you do that?
Well, I think I will give everybody a tremendous amount of credit that these are technology people that are, if they're not changing within my organization, they're changing at home, right? These are the guys who are out there and they're looking for ways to be more efficient in their home life. So for me to hand them the opportunity to say, hey, if there's opportunities for you to save the bottom line at home, there's opportunities for you to save the bottom line here. Mm-hmm. And we're all going to be part of that benefit, right? Whether it's bonuses at the end of the year or, investments in, new equipment that they love to learn new equipment. I mean, God, if I can go out and buy, a new machine, everybody thinks it's the greatest day ever.
Totally.
So, they're working for it. They want that to happen. So they're invested in finding out how to make their jobs more exciting every day, because they as well can get burnt out if they're doing the same mundane thing day in and day out. They're exhausted by it as well. So that's kind of been the first way that we've sort of touched on things. But we've also kind of touched on things by allowing everybody to bring in and train the next generation coming in as well. It's been an important part of them being able to feel their empowerment as employees to train.
And they like that, the training the next
They
people.
They do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Have you embraced any management structure like, I don't know if you've heard of the Rockefeller habits or if you do anything like EOS. Have you embraced any tool sets like that to kind of implement from a business change perspective, or just kind of more doing it as you do it?
We do it as we do it. We have a lot of, like I said, generational people that are working for us, but at the same time too, we've brought in a new wave of younger, recent grads from the community colleges, and we've bridged that gap. Some of the newer guys are coming in with new concepts and new ideologies, and some of the older generation are trying to find a bridge to make that work. So I think the most important thing in our business is empowering our workforce to be able to find what works best for us and what works best for our company and how we can be successful.
I love that empowerment message. So we have a couple of motions. We're going to wrap up pretty soon and get to rapid fire, but I want to ask you a couple of more questions. One, you mentioned workforce. And my thesis right now is we cannot get our foot off the gas on the workforce development. Okay. 6 months ago, all everybody wanted to talk about, even 4 months ago, all they wanted to talk about was workforce. There was such a demand. And I think there may be a perception now that with COVID that demand is down, but you've talked about workforce from a transitional perspective. Can you elaborate on your view on the importance of workforce development in Connecticut when it comes to manufacturing?
Workforce development, I think, is the backbone of so many successes that can happen, whether it's in the manufacturing industry or whether it's the economic stability of the state in itself, right? I am a huge advocate in making sure that people love what they do for a living and love their job. And I think manufacturing is an area that I think so often was overlooked, but now is starting to come back. I'm so impressed with how we're getting into, manufacturing leaders are getting into the school systems and at an early age, whether it be in middle school or early high school, to sort of talk about these options. Because I don't necessarily think that it is the alternative to, say, going to college. I think that they could be kind of butted up against both of them. I think it's important you can get a trade education and still continue with a college education in the future if that's what you decide to do. Because there's nothing better than having both of those foundations, as I shared from my own story, right? I did this reverse education. I went and got a master's degree in business and then went back to trade school. Because, the stepping stones haven't, let's say you go and you learn a trade in high school, you go to one of these trade high schools, you can always become a business leader because you have that foundation of trade right from the beginning. And it doesn't matter what it is, whether you go into plumbing or electrician or carpentry or hair care or whatever it may be, you get a trade, you can always pass that on to the next generation, go to college to learn how to run a business, go to college to learn how to be an executive in that industry. On the flip side of that, too, I think that, as I've mentioned, too, manufacturing is also a talent. There is certain skill sets that you have to have in order to be able to go into this. And I think often people could be incredibly bright and be incredibly versatile. And they overlook manufacturing, thinking that maybe it's not going to be as economically, they're not going to be making the big bucks. But that also is not true. Manufacturing is one of the highest paid jobs that you can get in the state right now. There are some really, really good starting salaries for somebody walking in, straight out of high school, could range, $36,000 to $50,000, which is a great 18-year-old job, right?
Sure is.
It sure is. And that's because you have skills, you have fine skills. So I encourage families to have these conversations very early on as you're talking about your children's careers. My husband and I are already having it about our own children and making sure that when, they start to decide what they're going to do in the future, that it really is something that they love and is innately passionate about them, not just something that is, on the pipeline of maybe I'd like to be a musician or a doctor or an attorney. Like, what do you really want to do? And I think that you'll find that there are several people out there, lots of people out there who would love this industry had they been exposed to it at a time that they were formative in where they wanted to go with their career.
Wow. Well, you just hit the nail on the head as far as I was concerned and dovetailed right into what I was thinking about. I love what you keep saying over and over again about find what you're passionate about. It's something I'm passionate about, finding your passion. I've always said it's much easier to find a way to make a good living doing what you love than find a way to love the thing that makes you money. That is never the recipe for happiness. And I think we know for sure we have one go around on this life, and we better make sure we take advantage of it.
I completely agree, Ari.
That's tremendous. Well, listen, Marcy, let's get to the rapid fire round of questions and go from there. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right, here we go. Red Sox or Yankees?
Yankees.
Oh, Marcy, I liked you so much. Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts?
Dunkin' Donuts.
When you travel, and let's take COVID out of the equation here, when you take time off, you a staycation or an exotic destination lady?
Exotic destination.
There you go. Get out there. iPhone or Android?
Android.
Sports car or SUV?
SUV.
All right. If you had to do something other than be the CEO of Excello Tool, and it could be anything, what would you do?
I'd be a rock star.
Oh, like a rock and roll star?
Yeah, like a singer, like a big time, like Pink.
Yeah, I was thinking
I'd go real hard.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. Do you have a favorite business book?
I liked. No, I don't think I do.
All right.
Sheryl Sanders, probably.
Yeah. She's good.
Lean In. That was a good one for me.
All right, cool. Lean In. Good book. Marcy, what's one thing that you learned early in your career or early in your life that you think has helped propel you to all the great success that you've had?
I think one of the most important skills that I've learned in all of my career, and certainly from my parents, and certainly in my marriage, and certainly with my children and with my employees, is the most important thing is to listen. It's incredibly important to make sure that you understand whatever the negotiation you're having with the other side of the coin. Because, you can't make rash decisions or you can't make compassionate decisions without understanding the other perspective of the other person. And you learn from that. You're able to kind of form your own opinion if you can just quietly sit there and listen to what your alternate conversation is saying to you.
That's tremendous. And last question, what's one thing that you've learned later in your career or later in your life that you wish you could go back and tell young Marcy that if she listened to you would make a huge impact in her life?
I should have been a rock star. No, it goes back to what I was saying. Like I jumped into going to college without ever understanding really what I wanted to be and what direction I wanted to be. And fortunately, if I had the opportunity that I was able to backpedal and kind of change my direction. But if I had known then what I know now, I would have started my career off in the trades and let it kind of grow from that.
You've been a little farther ahead. Marcy, it's absolutely been tremendous talking with you today. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a real pleasure, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Ari. The pleasure's mine.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct.
As always, thanks so much for tuning in. I definitely want your feedback and hope you subscribe. But what I want the most is to build a community where we learn and grow with each other. I hope you're getting a lot of value out of the time we're spending together. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you next time.